You are standing in your kitchen. It is 6:47 in the morning. You open a door, press 2 buttons, and in 90 seconds, your food is hot. You do not think about it. You never think about it. But the reason that machine exists is one of the strangest accidents in the history of human invention. And it started with a melted candy bar in a hallway on June 13th, 1945. Percy Spencer was not trying to change the world that day. He was an engineer at Raytheon, walking past a piece of military radar equipment called a magnetron, when he noticed something strange. The chocolate bar in his shirt pocket had melted, not from body heat, not from the sun, but from invisible waves passing through the air around him. He stopped. He thought. And instead of walking away, he did something almost no one else would have done. He leaned in. That single moment of curiosity produced the microwave oven. But here is the part that gets left out of the story. Percy Spencer was not the only person who had walked past that magnetron. Other engineers had felt the warmth. Other people had noticed strange things near the equipment. They all kept walking. Spencer stopped. The difference between an accident and an invention is not luck. It is attention. Now hold that thought, because on the other side of the world, on the same date in history, June 13th, another man was doing something that should have been impossible. He was mailing himself. His name was William Henry Ireland, and the year was 1897. He folded himself into a wooden crate approximately the size of a steamer trunk and had himself shipped from Richmond, Virginia to Washington, D.C. by freight. He survived, he arrived, and when the crate was opened, he reportedly stepped out, brushed off his jacket, and asked if there was anything to eat. This was not a stunt, it was a statement. Ireland was testing a system. He wanted to know whether a human being could be moved through official postal infrastructure without detection, without harm, and without anyone asking a single question. The answer apparently was yes. The Postal Service had no rule against it because it had never occurred to anyone to make one. Clarence Saunders, a lawyer who studied the Ireland case decades later, described it as a perfect example of what he called systemic blindness. The tendency of large institutions to only prohibit what has already happened, never what has not yet been tried. Rules, he argued, are always written in the past tense. They describe the last disaster. They never anticipate the next one. Which brings us to the third story from the history of June 13th. And this one is the strangest of all. In 1363, King Edward III of England issued a royal decree. The decree was about clothing. Specifically, it was about the color purple. Purple dye at the time was extraordinarily expensive. It's produced from a species of sea snail called Murex brandaris. It took thousands of mollusks to produce a single ounce of pigment. Purple was, quite literally, worth more than gold by weight. So Edward banned it. Not for everyone, only for commoners. Purple became the legal property of the crown. A merchant wearing a purple garment could be fined. A tradesman seen in purple cloth could be imprisoned. The color itself became a status crime. Historians who study sumptuary laws, that is the technical term for laws that regulate what people are allowed to wear or consume, have found that these decrees were almost always passed in moments of social anxiety. Researcher Alan Hunt, in his landmark 1996 study Governance of the Consuming Passions, documented hundreds of these laws across medieval Europe and found a consistent pattern. Whenever the gap between rich and poor began to narrow, the rich passed a law to make the gap visible again. In other words, the ban on purple was never really about purple. It was about visibility. It was about the terror of not being able to tell just by looking at someone where they stood in the order of things. And here is where all three stories connect. Percy Spencer noticed something everyone else ignored because he was paying a different kind of attention. William Ireland mailed himself through a system that had never imagined a human as cargo because the system only saw what it expected to see. And Edward III banned a color not because purple was dangerous, but because it made people harder to sort, harder to rank, harder to keep in their place. Each of these stories is about the same thing. They are about the way systems, institutions, rules, technologies, social orders are built around assumptions, and they all break or transform or reveal themselves the moment someone steps outside the assumption. Psychologist Carl Weick spent decades studying what he called sense-making, the process by which people and organizations interpret the world around them. His research, published in his 1979 book, The Social Psychology of Organizing, found that the most dangerous moment for for any institution is not a crisis from outside. It is the moment when reality stops matching the mental model the institution was built on. The Postal Service had no model for a human in a crate. The medieval court had no model for a commoner who looked royal. The Raytheon engineers had no model for a magnetron that cooked food. And then someone came along who did not share the model. Spencer cooked an egg next to the magnetron. It exploded, which he apparently found delightful, and then spent weeks experimenting until he had a working prototype. He did not invent the microwave because he was smarter than everyone else. He invented it because he was willing to follow a strange observation past the point where most people stop. Ireland, for his part, was never prosecuted. There was no law to prosecute him under. He became a footnote in postal history, a name that appears occasionally in academic papers about regulatory gaps. But the case he made, that a human being could be treated as an object by a bureaucratic system, and that the system would simply process that object without question, resonates in ways that go far beyond a wooden crate in 1897. And the purple. The purple is the oldest story of all, because the instinct behind it has never gone away. The desire to make invisible things visible. The desire to look at a person and know instantly where they belong. Every dress code in every institution in the world is descended from Edward III's decree. Every uniform, every badge, every lanyard. You participate in this system every single day. You read people's clothing. You read their shoes. You make assumptions before a word is spoken. This is not a character flaw. It is a cognitive shortcut so deeply embedded in human social behavior that researchers at Princeton found, in a study conducted by psychologist Alexander Todorov, that people form judgments about a stranger's trustworthiness within 1/10 of a second of seeing their face. 1/10 of a second. The purple band was just Edward III trying to make that 10th of a second work in his favor. 3 stories, 3 dates, 3 moments where someone tried something the system had never imagined. One man melted chocolate and followed the strangeness all the way to a kitchen appliance that now sits in over 90% of American homes. One man climbed into a box and proved that the Postal Service could not tell the difference between a human being and a package. And one king banned a color because he was terrified of a world where you could not tell, just by looking, who was in charge. The microwave on your counter, the shipping label on the box your last online order arrived in, the way you dressed this morning without thinking about who you were signaling to. The strange thing about history is that it never actually ends. It just gets repackaged, and sometimes it arrives at your door in a crate, and when you open it, something unexpected steps out, just like it did the morning a man walked past a radar machine and stopped to wonder why his candy bar was warm.